Hello and welcome to Vibrant Lives podcast, a podcast dedicated to your health and well-being, featuring interviews with experts about nutrition, physical health, mental health, and my 5-minute food facts series, which are short episodes where I discuss nutrition-related topics. I'm Amanda Hayes, your host. I'm a lawyer turned nutritionist, and I'm on a quest to learn as much as I possibly can about living a healthy, active, and fulfilling life, which I would call a vibrant life, hence the name of this podcast, and sharing what I learn with you on this podcast. The health and nutrition space can be a confusing one where information and misinformation abound, and identifying reliable, trustworthy sources of information is not always straightforward, but my aim is to help you do that by speaking with knowledgeable guests who can explain their area of expertise in an accessible way and provide you with practical tips that you can use to improve your own well-being. Before I introduce today's guest, I will quickly acknowledge that any information or advice provided in Vibrant Lives podcast is not intended to be used to treat or prevent any medical conditions, and it's never a substitute, as you know, for advice from your own health professionals. Today, I'm honoured to be here with Nick Lee OAM, the founder and chair of the Jodi Lee Foundation. The Jodi Lee Foundation is one of the leading voices in Australia for bowel cancer prevention. And for anyone listening who's not Australian, OAM refers to the Medal of the Order of Australia. It recognises Australians who have demonstrated outstanding service or exceptional achievement. The Jodi Lee Foundation came into being out of tragedy. In 2008, Nick's wife Jodi complained of constipation, abdominal pain and some bloating. She went to see her doctor, who recognised an obstruction of her bowel, and this precipitated a whirlwind of emergency surgery and a diagnosis of stage 4 bowel cancer. Jodi was only 39. Tragically, she died in January 2010, and we'll hear how this compelled Nick to start the Jodi Lee Foundation. This is actually an opportune time to present this podcast, as June is Bowel Cancer Awareness Australia's Bowel Cancer Awareness Month, where people are encouraged to fundraise to raise awareness about bowel cancer. And the Jodi Lee participates in this initiative too, which Nick and I will discuss. To set the scene for our discussion, here are some facts about bowel cancer in Australia. Australia actually has one of the highest rates of bowel cancer in the world, and I was quite surprised to learn that. It's the second most common cause of cancer-related death in Australia after lung cancer, and this year it's estimated that 15,500 people will be diagnosed with bowel cancer. Tragically, every 2 hours bowel cancer claims a life. That's 100 people every week and over 5,300 each year. The thing that is really interesting about bowel cancer is that if it's detected early in stages 1 or 2, 99% of bowel cancers can be successfully treated or even prevented. And that's why it's so important to raise awareness about prevention. And we're going to hear how the Jodi Lee Foundation is on a mission to do just that. Today I'm here with Nick Lee OAM, the founder and chair of the Jodi Lee Foundation. So hi Nick, welcome to Vibrant Lives podcast.
Hi Amanda, good to be here.
Thank you. Nick, first of all I wanted to congratulate you on being awarded the OAM, which is a Medal of the Order of Australia, in the Australia Day Honours earlier this year. So congratulations.
Yeah, it was a massive thrill. Obviously you don't set out to get those types of awards, but wonderful to receive that, and great recognition of the impact the foundation has had over many years.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we go through the podcast, people will understand why you were the recipient of that award. So I like to start the podcast episodes with some quick fire questions to get to know a little bit about the guests. So you, obviously, in this case, outside your work as the chair and founder of the Jodi Lee Foundation. So Nick, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Adelaide, which I loved.
Yeah, same. And your favourite form of exercise?
Well, if I'm doing a sort of cardio exercise, it's cycling. But when it comes to strength and toning and flexibility, I do quite a bit of Pilates, which I also love. And then if it's social, it's tennis. I love playing tennis.
Excellent.
So,
Oh,
yeah.
that's great. Well, that's a very good mix of different forms of exercise. And Nick, your go-to meal for dinner, say on a busy weeknight?
I try and get as much fish into my diet as possible. So I would say salmon, and if it's summer, I'll have it with a salad, and if it's winter, I'll have it with vegetables. So,
Yum.
yeah.
Delicious and healthy. And are you currently reading anything at the moment?
I am. I'm trying to get through Sapiens, which is taking me a long time. I need
Right.
a holiday or something like that. It's
Yeah,
pretty
yeah.
heavy going. So I must say it's taking me some time to get through it.
Yeah, sometimes non-fiction books like that, when you go to read them at the end of the night, you get through a few pages and then and you're asleep. Not that it's a boring book, but it's just, it's harder than
Yeah, I'm
saying.
averaging, I reckon, about 2 pages at the moment before
It'll
that.
take you a while.
Yeah.
And are you enjoying listening to anything at the moment? It could be music, an audiobook, podcast.
I love listening to podcasts. My most recent podcast was listening to yours.
Oh,
I
great.
was coming on to today. But prior to that, Paul Taylor has a great podcast called the Mind, Body, Brain Project. And given that covers areas of interest for me, I find that pretty fascinating. He's got wonderful knowledge and gets some great guests on as well.
Oh, fantastic. I'll definitely check that one out. And your favourite holiday destination?
My favourite holiday destination would have to be Lake Como in Italy.
Lovely.
I spent a couple of years in Vietnam, so I'm very partial to that as well. But no, Lake Como in Italy.
Oh, lovely. I've never been there. It's on my bucket list. So let's dive into bowel cancer. So June is Bowel Cancer Awareness Month, which is an initiative of the Bowel Cancer Awareness Australia. So I think in that sense, this is a timely episode. And I just wanted to acknowledge that on your website, I saw that the Swannies are supporting the Jodi Lee Foundation during June. Are you a Swan? How come the Swannies? Are you a Swannies supporter?
I am, and both my kids were born in Sydney.
Oh, right.
So yeah, we love the Swans, and
Yep.
we've had an ongoing relationship with them over about 8 years, and they've got a lot of connections in their club. John Nonmai, the coach, has had parents and in-laws impacted by the disease. Quite a number of players, Isaac Heaney, Oliver Florent lost his father. He's one of our ambassadors as well. So it is a really good vehicle to get awareness messages out there, given the size of the following behind the AFL and the Swans.
Yeah, oh, that's fantastic. So, Nick, to set the scene for our ongoing discussion, can you explain to us what is bowel cancer, which is also referred to as colorectal cancer?
Yeah, so it's a cancer that is in the lower end of the digestive tract, and it appears often to start with as benign polyps, which are like little pimples on the inside of your bowel wall. We can talk about this in a bit more detail, but as it progresses through the bowel wall and into other organisms, I should say, that's a bit of a slip. It then is a later stage cancer and obviously more difficult to treat.
So from my understanding, it starts in the lining of the bowel wall, which are the polyps you were talking about.
Yeah, that's right. And often those polyps, as I said, will be benign, but sometimes those cells change and they become cancerous, and they get into the bowel wall and then into the lymph nodes and beyond. So what we're trying to do as a foundation is obviously get to it early, because your outcomes, if you can get to bowel cancer at either stage 1 or 2, is very good, but later stages is not so good. So that's something that we're very focused on at the foundation.
Yes, and we will talk more to that. I just want to say that I mentioned in the introduction that bowel cancer is the second most common cancer affecting people in Australia after prostate for men and breast for women. It's also the second most common cause of cancer-related death in Australia after lung cancer. And I must admit, I didn't actually know that. Each year, over 15,000 people are diagnosed with bowel cancer in Australia. So I just wanted to talk about those statistics a little bit. And is there a difference, Nick, in the incidence of bowel cancer between men and women?
Yeah, well, before I answer that, one stat that I will add, which surprises a lot of people, is that it is now the leading cancer killer in 25 to 34-year-olds.
Really?
So it does impact younger people. And I think the common perception is that it is an older man's disease, but clearly it's not. And to your question about how it impacts males and females, it's almost about 50-50, slightly higher incidence in males, but the mortality rate is higher in males because we typically get to it later at a later stage. So it's something that males in particular need to be more diligent about testing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you think that could be because men perhaps, well, there's maybe more of a lack of awareness amongst men for one thing, but also they might tend to just ignore the signs or symptoms a little bit, the sort of she'll be right mate approach. Do you think that plays into it?
I think it definitely does. I think there's multiple aspects, and you've touched on a couple of them. I think also women are used to testing for various things from a younger age, and so it's not such a leap then to test for bowel cancer, whereas, often for males, and currently the screening recommendation is from 50, we haven't really thought too much about testing. And if you've got this perception that it is an older man's disease, I turned 50 a couple of years ago and I feel like I'm in my early 30s.
Same.
You don't feel like it's something that you should be necessarily worrying about. And that's why I threw in that other statistic, because clearly it is impacting younger people.
Yeah, I wonder then if testing should be routinely done before the age of 50. I guess it's a risk-cost analysis, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And that's something that we are really passionate about. We might come on and talk about the story behind the foundation, but Jodi was 39 when she was diagnosed. So, it wouldn't have mattered for her that the screening age was 50. She was a lot younger than that. And we're just seeing more and more of this growing incidence. In fact, if you wind the clock back 40 years, it was the ninth leading cancer in that age group. It's now the highest. So it's in a relatively short period of time. It's on its way to the top.
No, that is incredibly interesting, and I guess we'll come back to that when we talk about some of the risk factors that might play into that. But you mentioned earlier, you alluded to the stages of bowel cancer, and perhaps you could just set that out for us clearly so we understand going forward what they are. Yeah,
so the first instance will be as I said, a small pimple-like polyp on the lower end of the digestive tract. If those cells then become cancerous, it will go into the bowel wall. So stage one is as a polyp in the digestive tract. Stage two is when the cancer has moved, or the polyp has moved into the bowel wall. It then goes into lymph nodes near the bowel, and that is the stage three, and the vehicle for taking it over time to other organs in the body. For Jodi, it was her liver. Sometimes you see it in the lung, and that's stage 4 bowel cancer. And the prognosis is not great for stage 4.
No, I imagine with any cancer, my dearest friend in a similar but different story to Jodi, was diagnosed with stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma when she was 39, and she sadly died 10 years ago now. So in young people, when things aren't right, you don't immediately jump to the conclusion that they have cancer. You look for all sorts of other explanations, I think.
Yeah, we have, that's a really important point, actually, that we get lots of these stories of people presenting with symptoms, and often it doesn't throw up symptoms and early warning signs like many other diseases. They call it the silent killer for that reason.
Yeah.
But many stories of people presenting with these symptoms to GPs, but because they're younger than 50, they're, tested for other things and not bowel cancer. And sometimes that ends very tragically. And we have a campaign called Trust Your Gut, which is all about, we as individuals know our bodies the best. And if something is going on, get off and see the GP. That's a great first step. And if you don't like what you've been told in terms of it's not getting you better, then keep searching and keep speaking to either your GP or find another GP until you're happy with the outcome.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We do know ourselves better than anyone else, and sometimes you have to be a bit persistent, I think. You know if you're not right, don't you? And you did mention that it can be asymptomatic, which is one of the reasons that screening is so important. Some people do experience symptoms, so can you talk us through what those symptoms are, just to raise awareness about that?
Yes, by far and away, the most important one to watch out for is blood when you go to the toilet. We've got another program coming up called View Your Poo.
Right, I like the name.
Yeah. And that's really encouraging people to say, look, have a look. And if you do see blood, get off and see your GP. Often that blood is microscopic, so it is important still to do the screening test. But that's the most important one. A change in bowel habits that lasts over longer than a 2-week period. Changes in weight, losing weight and not having sort of any explanations for losing weight. And then abdominal pain and bloating is the other symptom to watch out for.
And you can see why if someone presents with some of those symptoms, say bloating, there are so many other conclusions you might come to, like irritable bowel syndrome or, especially if the person is young. So, as you say, it's important to be persistent. And on your website, you have, I had a look at it, it's a symptom checker. So just talk us through how that works for anyone who's interested in going and having a look.
Yeah, the benefits of the symptom checker are twofold. One is to give people a really good understanding of what those symptoms are to watch out for. So you can see that on the checker and you can tick boxes as to any symptoms that you might have. And the second benefit is to have something that you can take along to the GP and have a conversation with the GP about, because that's going to be really helpful for the GP to then be able to determine what next. So, that works really well, that symptom checker.
Yeah, I'll put a link to that in the show notes if anyone would like to do that. And so let's talk now about the actual Jodi Lee Foundation, which you established in 2010. And can you tell us, what was your motivation to start the charity?
Well, really, I guess the period of time that Jodi went from her first operation, which was really sudden. We were living in Vietnam and 2 young kids. My son was only 4 at the time and my daughter was 2. When we first moved to Vietnam, and we'd been there a couple of years, and literally on a Thursday night, I was away with my team up in Hanoi. We were based in Ho Chi Minh City. She rang me and said, I've got abdominal pain. She wasn't sure what it was, and we weren't particularly concerned because she was fit and didn't have a family history. She went off to get checked the next day, and literally that same night, a ambulance was turned up to our house. The kids were fast asleep. I was still away, and she was airlifted to Bangkok for emergency surgery. And the surgery went well to remove the tumour, but 3 days after that, a specialist came to see us and said that the cancer had spread and then it was stage 4 bowel cancer. And he said, Jodi's only got 2 years to live. So we raced back to South Australia, tried a lot of treatments, evasive treatments, multiple rounds of chemo, abdominal operations, radiospheres, and nothing seemed to work. And, I had the awful experience in August 2009 of having to tell my two young kids that their mum was going to die.
Oh my God. Oh, I've got goosebumps. That's so sad.
Yeah. And of course, we didn't want to scare them. And at that time, we thought Jodi had about 12 months to live. But in January 2010, shortly after that conversation, she passed away just before her 42nd birthday.
Wow.
And it's difficult to describe. I just had this overwhelming desire to want to ensure that if I possibly could, no one else had to have that same experience with a disease that's so preventable. So without having a medical background and being able to contribute to coming up with a cure, we thought if we could just educate as many people as we could to take the simple steps to lower their risk, we had a chance to make a difference. And I'm really proud of the impact the foundation has had. And we've got loads of fantastic early detection stories.
Oh, that's amazing. Did Jodi know that this was something you thought you might do? Had you discussed it with her, or did you come up with it after she died?
She knew I was really passionate about making a difference, I guess, in that sector. I'd done quite a bit of fundraising, in terms of coping with the grief and dealing with what I was going through. I kind of felt like exercise was helping me a lot. So I did marathons and bike rides and other things to raise money, and raised about $150,000 that went to the Cancer Council. So she had a really good sense that, I was passionate about it, and it wasn't something that, when she passed away, I'm sure she knew that I was going to continue along that path.
Well, I'm sure she'd be very proud if she's looking down. What's the mission then? You've got an excellent mission statement. What's the mission of the Jodi Lee Foundation?
So we have a mission to empower Australians to take active steps to prevent bowel cancer. And I think we've done a really good job at raising awareness. And whilst we're a national organisation, we're based here in South Australia. South Australia has the highest participation rate of any state behind the government program when they send out their free kits. So I'd like to think that we've contributed to that. I think the area, I guess, that I feel most frustrated by over the last 12 years is that part about the active steps.
Yes.
I think we've been good at educating people, but not enough people have taken active steps. And I know for a fact if they had, we would have saved many more lives. So that's an ongoing challenge for us, and something that we're really passionate about with all these campaigns that we're running to get people to act on those messages.
So we will talk about some of those, but why do you think there's a bit of reluctance? I mean, what comes to mind for me is that a lot of people think they're personally a bit invincible, like, oh, that sort of happens to other people. Do you think there's a bit of that kind of feeling out there, or what do you think?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think, each individual has different motivations. But, a really interesting thing was one of the first events that we ran as a foundation was a event where we got all of our friends and family and others together and handed out testing kits to everybody.
Oh, right.
And just as a gift, it was a gala, or was a cocktail party. And there's about 130 people there. So everyone got a testing kits. And I reckon the participation rate when we measured it was something like 15 to 20%.
Oh, so not very high.
No, these are people that knew Jodi, and in many cases knew what she'd gone through, yet for some reason or another weren't taking the test. And I think a big component of that is that when the government suggests that we screen at 50, and I'm like you, think it should be at a younger age, people feel like they're younger. They don't think that's something for them. They think it's an older person that should be testing for that. So that's part of the problem. Sometimes people just don't want to know. They have a fear of the unknown. But with bowel cancer, because it is so treatable. 99% treatable if caught early. This is one to know about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the crux of what you're trying to promote and tell people about. If you catch it early, it's treatable. It's so important to know that.
Yeah, well, logically, it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? It's the second biggest cancer killer in this country. There's a simple test you can do to prevent it. So it's something that seems so simple, and the test is not particularly icky. The test that the government sends out and the test that we recommend through a lot of our programs is very simple to do.
Yeah.
A couple of samples, doesn't take any longer than making a cup of tea and you're done. But yeah, that's a big challenge, trying to get people to take that simple step.
I wonder too if part of the barrier might be the fact that you do have to stick a little brush in on your poo, and I mean it's very, very simple, and I've done it, and I've done it several times now, but it's very easy. But I must admit, the first time I did it, I'd have the little envelope in the bathroom and I'd like, not today. And then eventually when I did it, I'm like, oh, that was so easy. I don't know what I was waiting for.
Yeah, well, that's an important insight too, Amanda, is that the reparticipation rate is really high. So when government send out their testing kits, when people turn 50, only 32% or 33% of people do it. So the participation rate is very low. Once someone has done the test once, the reparticipation rate is up over 70%. Because people realise how simple it is. So a lot of our focus as a foundation is, how do we get people to take that test for the first time? Because we know if they do, they're more likely to take it again. Yeah,
well, I'm a case in point. I can't remember why. I mean, I've done testing for a few years, so pre-50. I think my dad he hasn't had bowel cancer, but he had some polyps, or anyway, there was a reason why I thought, oh, look, maybe I should do mine as well. So, but yes, I can attest it is actually very easy.
Yeah, so simple.
So let's talk about some of the initiatives that you do at the Jodi Lee Foundation. Probably the one I think is the most well known is the trek. You do an annual trek. You do one in South Australia, and you also now do one in Victoria. If someone's interested in the trek, tell us what can they expect? What's it like?
So the trek is a really fantastic event, I think, on a number of levels. It's important to the foundation, so it contributes to a good cause in terms of raising awareness and money. But for the individual, we make no excuses for the fact that it's quite a challenging trek, because what we're wanting people to do is get in the habit of exercising. And so being being an 80-kilometre trek over 2 days, so you've got the full day to do the 40 Ks each day, does mean for most people that they have to train.
Yeah.
And training, getting out in the environment with a group of friends that you're doing it with, and training together and doing a bit of fundraising for a good cause, is not only physically beneficial, but mentally beneficial as well. And we just find that the feedback that we get from people that do the treks is quite amazing on multiple levels. But, almost without exception, there's this sense of having contributed to something really important. And we spend a fair bit of time over the treks talking about the reason why we're all out there trekking. But just being in a wonderful environment with a group of people, which is wonderfully protective for mental health as well, and just enhances the overall experience. So, it's exciting. We get great feedback. As you said, we've got a South Australian trek. We've got another trek coming up in Victoria, in Apollo Bay, on the 21st to 22nd of October. And, all that information is in our on our website under our events page if people want to see it.
I did it several years ago now. It was pre-COVID. I can contribute to what everyone else said about positive feedback. I had such a fun time. I ended up walking with two men that I knew vaguely and this gorgeous young girl who was so much fun. Someone I never would have met normally because we're different ages. And in fact, we ran quite a bit of it. And we laughed and laughed the whole way. And I'm still in touch with those people from the trek.
Yeah, well, that's brilliant. And that's such a rewarding thing, isn't it, to meet people along the way. And, we've got quite a lot of people who are connected in some way to bowel cancer. So to understand, people's motivations for doing it, I think adds to the interest of it. But I've met so many wonderful people thanks to that trek.
Yeah, it's a great, and you often do it on the Hyson Trail or a section of the Hyson Trail. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, so this actually is the first year for the South Australian trek that we've departed from that. We went over to York Peninsula a month or so ago and did the Walk the York trail. So that was beautiful, stunning scenery. But yeah, the Hyson Trail is where we've done most of the treks, and I suspect next year we'll be back on the Hyson Trail as well.
Yeah, well, it is very beautiful. Do you plan to take it to any other states? Is that in the agenda?
Yeah, we've trialled it in Brisbane and under a sort of a different format, and Tasmania as well. And so we're constantly looking at opportunities to try and take that same experience to other states. So it's very much on our radar. We'd love to do something in Sydney in the not too distant future as well.
Yeah.
So.
The other nice thing about it is that a group of friends can make a bit of a holiday out of it, go and trek in Tassie for a few days and then have a few days in Hobart or whatever they like. It's nice to sort of make it into a bit of an event, isn't it, an occasion?
Yeah, and that happens a lot. We get a lot of people travelling from interstate and taking a few extra days either side to enjoy the state that they're in and their friends that are doing it with them. So yeah, it provides that opportunity.
Now, lovely podcast listeners, as you know, one of my passions is to bring you reliable information about nutrition. With this in mind, I've created a free guide called 5 Common Nutrition Myths Debunked. So if you want to know whether carbs make you gain weight or if red wine is good for your heart, download my free guide via the link in the show notes. And now back to my chat with Nick Lee. On your website, you have some amazing examples of how people can fundraise. I mean, obviously you could participate in the trek, but what are some other ideas if people are interested?
Well, we run a workplace program as well, which educates staff. So I'm doing a lot of that throughout this month, being Bowel Cancer Month, but we do that throughout the year. Mm-hmm. And often organisations, after running that session, will get quite sort of passionate about the foundation and do everything from, gold coin donations for something that they've got coming off. I've got a session coming up next week where they're doing a bit of a bake-off as a competition.
Cool.
It sometimes leads to corporate sponsorships. We've had ANZ having us as their host charity for their community ball where they had 650 people there. I raised a few $100,000. So, yeah, lots of sort of opportunities there. We've done, fundraisers on Mother's Day. We've done little black dress cocktail parties. We've got other events like cycling events and marathons where people can, so it doesn't really matter what exercise you're into. Yeah. I know you're a trail runner, but we've got lots of different opportunities for people to participate. We recently had a movie night for the Top Gun movie, and I think
great.
$10,000 through that. We have quiz nights, so just loads of opportunities, and it's a bit of a mixed bag on our events page. We've got kind of the Jodi Lee Foundation hosted events like we've talked about, but then there's a lot of groups that come to us and say, we've been impacted or we like what you're doing. We want to do our own event, and we can set them up on our website to be able to facilitate the awareness raising and the fundraising as part of that.
Oh, that is absolutely great, isn't it? So, you know, there's no limit to the imagination of how you can potentially fundraise. I mean, people can even have morning teas and things like that if they want to with a group of friends. And
yeah, that's right. So that, you know, there's a lot of kind of vehicles which brings people together on a social occasion to contribute to a great cause, which we love.
And I think you can't get to, well, we're middle age, I guess, this age in life and not be impacted in some way by cancer. Like, you know, who doesn't know someone that's had either bowel, breast? So it's important to raise awareness and give back. Nick, since you founded the Jodi Lee Foundation, can you tell us how has it grown? What's the impact been? Don't be modest.
Well, you know, I said I'm really proud, and I guess the things that make me feel 10 foot tall are when you get, as I did last week, literally through that workplace program, a guy I went to school with and said, you know, I went home and did the test sponsored by the company after you presented to us, and you know, I had 6 polyps found, and 2 of them I was told were cancerous, and you know, so on top of that early, and he won't be a statistic because of it. And so we've got so many of those stories, and so many of those stories of people under the age of 50 as well, which, you know, typically then, if it hadn't been the Jodi Lee Foundation communicating to them, they likely would have so that's super rewarding. And I think you know, there's a couple of other aspects which I hadn't even considered actually when founding the Jodi Lee Foundation. You kind of go, well, if we could save one life, it's all worth it. And we've done that in spades. But the other aspects that I hadn't considered, one is just contributing to people making better lifestyle and diet, better health choices. And that's, you know, might be someone doing a trek, or it might be someone, you know, heeding our advice around diet, nutrition, or might be someone getting involved in, you know, those Trust Your Gut campaigns and thinking, oh, I haven't been feeling quite right, I'm going to get off and see the GP. So that's a massive component. And another really important component is providing a vehicle for people who have been impacted to feel like they can do something as well. So you would have felt that on the trek, that there was a lot of people there that were there specifically because they had been impacted. So that provided a vehicle for them. You know, we've got a beautiful lady, Tanya Carey, who lost her twin sister, and she was thinking about doing the same. We met for coffee, and she said, "You're doing exactly what I want to do." She's now on our board. She's brilliant. Raised a huge amount of money, and you know, she feels part of the foundation family, truly. And so there's lots of aspects, I think, that you know, have really helped. And you know, if we can inspire people to live more healthy lives, you know, by perhaps never being impacted by cancer, you know, that's a result in itself.
One of the things that I think is really important that maybe you didn't realise you were creating when you first started was a safe space for people to talk about how they've been impacted by bowel cancer. Because as you said, at the trek, one of the questions you ask is, you know, why are you here? Like, and there's often a connection or a reason. And so people can speak to other people who understand what they've been through, whether it's a friend, a family member, themselves.
Yeah, and that sort of the importance of that, in addition to having that kind of open environment, is it does help spread that awareness. You know, you convert people into almost ambassadors for the cause, because you know, you're providing a vehicle for them to open up and talk to others about it. And you know, I'm sure the flow-on effect from you doing the trek and speaking to friends and family and others and telling them about what you're doing causes them to think, you know, should I be doing something about this?
It's a ripple effect, isn't it?
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the risk factors now. So there are, unfortunately, like many cancers, we don't actually know or don't fully understand what causes bowel cancer, but what we do know is that there are some risk factors, and some of them are non-modifiable things, and that's things you can't change. For example, your risk goes up as you age, and you may have a genetic predisposition, which you can't change. But many of the risk factors are things we can actually do something about. They're lifestyle risk factors. So let's talk about some of those, Nick, and what are some of the important things that people can do to reduce their chances of being diagnosed with bowel cancer?
Yeah, so with a vision to beat bowel cancer, we've used the word beat to try and help people remember the key things that they can do to lower their risk. So the B is be active and healthy. So that's exercising, and that's watching your alcohol intake, not smoking, eating well, all those sorts of things. A couple of things that has come through in research perhaps more recently is the link between well-cooked red meat and processed meats, and that probably explains why we have such a high incidence here in this country. So that's important. And that's one of the reasons I said before that I try and get as much fish into my diet as possible. And the other thing that I think we're going to hear a lot more about into the future is the impact of sedentary lifestyles. And there was a study done in the US that said that if you do have a sedentary lifestyle, you're 40% greater risk of getting bowel cancer. Goodness. So not insignificant. The other thing to watch out for is weight. We've seen through some research that there's a link with diabetes, but weight as well, and particularly where you carry weight, visceral fat in particular, and that also might explain why men have a slightly higher incidence. So all those sorts of things, and of course they're all things that not only protect you against bowel cancer, but many other diseases as well. The E is to explore your family history. So you mentioned that some of these factors you're kind of born with, but at least with the knowledge of that, you can start getting tested from an earlier age if you need, and that's the advice that you're given. A is to act on symptoms, all those things that we talked about before, but equally sometimes it doesn't throw up early warning signs. So it's just important to be on top of all of the things that you should be testing for. And T is to take the simple tests. So that's the message that we're trying to get out through all of our initiatives and programs and our workplace program to try and help people understand how they can lower their risk.
Yeah, that's really great. Beat. That's a catchy little thing for people to remember. I like that. So I had a look at some research about risk factors, and one of the things that stuck out to me was, according to the World Cancer Research Fund, there is convincing evidence that foods containing dietary fibre decrease your risk. So that's another reason to eat well and to avoid processed foods, particularly, as you mentioned, well-cooked red meat and processed meat. And alcohol, that's a bad one.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I have a pretty simple philosophy. I think if you can eat food in its rawest form, it's going to move through your body pretty quickly. If you eat ultra-processed foods, then it takes a lot of energy for your body to process it, and it could cause some problems in your digestive tract. So, that's a pretty oversimplified philosophy. But, some of the things that we're seeing, things like the Mediterranean diet, that's one of the diets I think that has stood the test of time and continually shown the health benefits. And when I look at that diet, I think that that's probably closest to what I would recommend in terms of bowel cancer. But you're right, making sure that you get plenty of dietary fibre in your gut is really, or through your system, is really important.
Yeah, I mean, that helps food move through, so it's not sitting there and, who knows what, fermenting and creating all sorts of weird byproducts, which is one of the problems, of course, with processed food. Like, you're eating stuff it's not actually food. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a big problem, isn't it? You know, we walk into the supermarket and pretty much everything that's stuck in eye level in front of your face
Yeah.
is processed food. So the temptation to purchase those products can be overwhelming for some. So
Yes. Well, sadly, it's actually easier, isn't it, to
yeah,
buy something that's already made. And I remember once when my kids were small, they wanted some cookies. And I said to them, well, you go and read the ingredients. They're old enough to read. You go and read the ingredients. And if you can understand everything on the packet, then you can have the cookies. So they ran over all excited, and then they walked back with long faces. There was about, 15 ingredients. So needless to say, they...
are numbers. A lot of them are numbers, and I don't understand all of those.
No.
Reasonably well researched in this space.
Yeah. I just wanted to quickly touch on something a bit outside the Jodi Lee Foundation. Nick, you're a director of the Healthy Minds with Tom Neame, who I interviewed a few years ago. And we won't go into that too much because it could be a whole nother episode, but just tell us a little bit about what Healthy Minds does and why you're involved.
Yeah, well, hopefully some of your listeners did hear that podcast you did with Tom, because he's a super guy who's done amazing things. And he came up with a world first after doing his PhD, which was a preventative effect for anxiety, depression, and eating disorders. And probably the best way for your listeners to think about it is think about mental health as a continuum. Okay, we all sit there somewhere from one end, if I call it the red end, where someone's stuck and can't function, right up to the green end, which is where people are performing at their best. Where Healthy Minds works really is that preventative end of the continuum. So what we do is try and teach people the skills to navigate life's inevitable problems. You know, for me, obviously it was losing my wife at a fairly young age. But everybody gets sat on their bum at some stage, and you need those bounce back skills. And so that's what we teach. And then equally, if you practice the skills that we teach, moving people to that green end, moving people to their, higher well-being, where they're obviously going to perform at their best. So that's where Healthy Minds sits. And we do work with corporates, lots of programs with corporates, lots of programs with schools.
Yes.
And we just love the feedback that we get from our participants. That's very rewarding. Sometimes I run a session around purpose where I talk about, this change of my life from being a director at Unilever to the Jodi Lee Foundation and now Healthy Minds. And I just, I actually find it difficult to put into words how much that having a really strong sense of purpose and living a purposeful life has meant for my well-being and outlook on life.
The interesting thing about your two roles is they're both in the preventative space, one in a physical sense and one in a mental health sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. I call it sort of often the heads and tails of health. And they're very linked. There's so many links, and increasingly we're finding this from research about the importance of gut health and your microbiome and the impact that has on your mental health. Absolutely.
The gut health, the gut's sometimes referred to as a second brain these days.
Absolutely. There's lots of nice links there.
So, and I'll put links to that in the show notes. So, Nick, it's time to wrap up. You're a busy man. You've got other meetings to get to. So, Nick, who inspires you? Who or what actually inspires you?
You know what? I mean, this is very contextualized to what I do and spend most of my waking life thinking about. Those that inspire me are people that actually act, have the courage to act to improve their health. And the people that motivate me are the people that don't act, because I'm constantly trying to think about how do I switch someone on to, take heed of the advice and actually act on the advice. So that's probably what occupies a lot of my thinking, but also inspires and motivates me.
Oh, that's excellent. And the final question, and I ask this to all of my guests, if you could recommend 2 things that people could do to improve their well-being, they can be anything at all, what would they be?
Sleep
Mm-hmm.
So getting enough sleep, obviously that's different for every individual, but your body through the recovery process of sleeping is just so vital to both mental health and gut health. And the other one, linking back to that statistic that I talked about before, was move more. Biologically, bodies are designed to move. And unfortunately, as our society matures, we find more and more excuses not to have to move.
Yeah.
And everything becomes convenient, and it's just having such a big impact on people's health. So make as many excuses as you can to move more. It's vital.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. And if people want to see what you're doing at the Jodi Lee Foundation, where should they look?
Go to our website, and which is Jodi Lee Foundation, and Jodi spelled Jodi. Have a look at our website. Lots of information on there about how you might want to get involved, and we talked about treks and other things.
Yeah.
Lots of important information about bowel cancer itself and how to protect yourself. But also, if you wanted to get involved in, our workplace program, that has saved so many people over the last 12 years. There's a chance to save your life or your colleague's life.
Wow.
So, our website, reach out to us, and we'd love to partner with you.
Well, that was truly inspiring. Thank you so much, Nick. And of course, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you today, and thank you so much for your time and sharing your knowledge with us here at Vibrant Lives Podcast.
I appreciate that, Amanda. No, it's a wonderful way for us to share that message, and I just encourage your listeners to act on one thing that we've talked about. That would be awesome.
Excellent. And that was Nick Lee OAM, founder and chair of the Jodi Lee Foundation, doing really important work in the space of bowel cancer prevention and awareness. And I really hope that my chat with Nick today inspired you to act. If you're under the age of 50 and don't want to wait until you receive your free kit from the government at the age of 50, then it is very easy to buy a bowel cancer screening test. Many chemists stock them, and you can also order them online. Thank you for listening today, and I really hope you enjoyed my discussion with Nick Lee, even though there were parts of it that were obviously really sad. If you could please share the podcast and tell your friends about it, it would mean so much to me. Word of mouth is still actually one of the best ways for people to find out about my podcast. And if you could take a minute to leave a rating on Apple Podcasts, I would be so grateful. Please follow me on Instagram at vibrant_lives_podcast or on Facebook at Vibrant Lives Podcast, and check out my website at vibrantlivspodcast.com. On my website, you'll find all of my podcast episodes and reviews of books about health that I recommend. So please do DM me or send me an email via the contacts page on my website, and let me know what you'd like to hear more of, or if you just want to say hi, I'd love to hear from you. And in my next episode, I've got a really interesting discussion for you with Dr. Catherine Grellman about women in sport, and we take a deep dive into how to find the best fitting sports bra, why that's important, and we also talk about the menstrual cycle for women. I think it's vital for both women and men to understand the menstrual cycle, what's going on, and how the hormones can impact mood and how you feel in general, and if you're an athlete, how it impacts your sports performance. This podcast is recorded on ancient Kaurna land. I acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of this land and pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Thank you for tuning in today. Eat well, move well, think well, live vibrantly.